Hi everyone, thanks for joining today's webinar. My name is Jeje. I'm the head of enterprise sales at Totaljobs Group, a Stepstone company. Now, if you've attended a Totaljobs webinar in the past, you'll know that we usually kick off with slides before entering into a panel discussion. However, today we're stripping it back, we're giving you more, and dedicating the entire webinar to having a chat around tried and tested tactics that we've learned over the last year to offer you insight and advice for your business and for the months ahead in light of the Prime Minister's roadmap to end COVID restrictions by the 21st of June. So we have a couple of housekeeping. Please drop your questions in to the chat box as we go, and then the webinar will be recorded and shared with you in an email after the session. But let's get into some context for this discussion. The UK's roadmap out of lockdown has seen children return to school as of last week, while non-essential retail is due to open on the 12th of April. And that's along with outdoor hospitality. Now, the budget from Rishi Sunak at the start of March anticipated that our economy will be back at pre-pandemic levels by the middle of next year. Now, I've looked into that. The growth rate should be around 4% for this year, maybe up to 5%. And for next year, according to the Bank of England, it could be between 5 and 7.25%. So that's really optimistic. However, let's look at today's context. The UK unemployment rate stands at 5.1%, with over 11 million people furloughed since the start of the scheme. The UK's vaccination programme is offering us a light at the end of the tunnel. We reached the milestone of 26 million vaccinated this past weekend. All of this change, since last year, has meant that businesses are seeing strategies and their futures with new eyes. So we wanted to bring together some of the key players in this webinar to talk about what they've learned and what new ways that they've discovered following the pandemic. And ultimately, what all this means for the way we attract, recruit, and retrain talent moving forward. So let's hear it from some of our panelists. Charlotte, Martin, Elaine, Euan, please can you introduce yourselves?
Hi, my name is Martin Nicholson. I'm HR Director at Totaljobs for the last year.
Hi, my name is Elaine dela Cruz. I'm the co-founder of a diversity, equity and inclusion company called Project 23.
Hi, I'm Charlotte. I am an attraction and talent community manager for AMS, working on the Barclays account.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Euan McNair. I look after attraction, engagement and part sourcing. I also, like Charlotte, work for Alexander Mann Solutions, and I am aligned to the Royal London and Royal London Asset Management account that we have.
All right, excellent. So let's kick this off. Charlotte, let's start with you. So how did 2020 alter the attraction and the hiring strategies of businesses?
Massively. I think it can't be underestimated, actually, the amount of change that we saw. I think obviously there's the kind of the general day-to-day how to do recruitment. So things like interviews all had to become remote, they had to be done virtually, onboarding, all that kind of stuff. I think the bit that we probably don't think about is the fact that we've seen a lot of people out of work. And actually that means we've had an influx of candidates, and the candidates that we have had, you know, I think we've had to really focus and think about their mental health going through this. I think we've had to really consider the feedback that we give back to those candidates to make sure that, you know, they're getting lots and lots of rejections, or sometimes not even a rejection. I think that's been a really important piece. I think as well, obviously the remote working has been a massive impact. So even if people are actually in work, if they're looking for internal roles, they're doing it at home. They're interviewing with kids, they're interviewing with dogs around, and it can be really difficult. So I think there's been more around actually not just doing everything virtually, but actually making sure people feel more comfortable while they go through that process.
Martin, what have you thought, considering that you can see it from our perspective?
Yeah, I mean, after a brief pause in the summer while we started to collect our thoughts of, you know, I think we all thought COVID might be a few weeks, and clearly it wasn't. After a brief pause, we then cracked on into filling vacancies and filling positions, and still a pretty busy 2020. I think from my perspective, to Charlotte's point, there was a surplus of candidates. There was certainly volume in the market in terms of candidate attraction, and filling our pipeline, certainly. What became apparent after, to Charlotte's point also, after we got over the how do we interview and putting in place some principles there, was actually our onboarding and how do we minimize our disruption to our culture, because these people are coming in and have now in some cases been in the organization pretty much a year now without setting footing in the office. So how have we worked on that?
Actually, I'll jump in there just to say that I was onboarded virtually and I've had an amazing time. So do you know what? I never thought it could happen, but it has happened. So thanks very much to Totaljobs. Elaine, any thoughts about this?
Did you say Elaine? Did you say me?
Yeah.
Definitely, many. I think for me, there's an element of organizations, businesses, leaders needing to break down and redefine what we mean when we say how businesses operate. Talking about building upon what Charlotte and Martin were both saying there. We talk about process, we talk about systems. Actually, I think what COVID has shown us is that, yes, it's hard, times are hard. We started to bring emotions into work, into the workplace. But actually our emotions and the struggles and the difficulties of having all sorts of different types of lives were there pre-COVID. But now suddenly we're on screen, we're looking right into people's homes and we can see that. And I think we've seen businesses start to embrace the fact that, yes, there are emotions here. We've seen vulnerable leadership every now and then when a CEO says in the dip of it all back in, I don't know, August for some, this is hard. But if I'm being honest, I think there's still a way to go and accept that businesses don't really know how to deal with emotions at work, particularly emotions from people who aren't like us and not having, we don't tend to have an intersectional approach about emotions that are welcome at work. But if we're generally still talking about being ourselves at work, our whole selves, as people say, then we need to embrace the fact that the way that businesses operate is about our whole selves and all the emotions that we have as human beings, rather than just the bit that we want from you at work. Long way to go for businesses.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Euan?
Do you know, I think it's such a good point that Elaine makes. I think, looking at the pandemic and looking at what we've worked through, it's the most challenging time that we'll all likely experience. I think for me, the way that I've sort of trying to look at it, and it's been such a difficult time, people have lost loved ones, friends, family members, but if we cannot use the pandemic and the challenges as catalyst for change in wider society and the world of work, we're missing a trick. So the way I've sort of entered into it is that in the middle of difficulty lies opportunity, and we need to grasp the opportunities that have been presented to us because of this. So for me, in the world that Charlotte and I operate in, attraction and engaging with talent, be it talent acquisition, be it employer brand or EVP, or just how do we engage with a workforce that's now 100% remote? There's never been a better time to ask the question why. Why have we always done it that way? And can we do things differently? Can we do more with less? Can we get quite creative? So be it onboarding, be it attracting talent, it's been a fascinating time, and I think the businesses that are coming out of it strong made really good decisions in the first 2 or 3 weeks, in the first couple of months, and I think that will genuinely impact how they retain, engage, and attract talent for the next 3 to 5 years. And to Charlotte's point right at the start, there was this, this influx of talent. There was loads of applications. You reject more than you hire. We know that, but you have a duty of care to these people, in my opinion. We all have a duty of care. And we've done some nice kind of little pieces that remove the tech element, and we've picked up the phone to candidates to say, we've now noticed, Charlotte, you've applied to 4 or 5 different roles. What can we do to help? Because we're all people. We're all trying to get somewhere, right? So I think, if nothing else, the person-to-person engagement over the last little while has been absolutely key, and that kind of follows on from Elaine's point, I think.
Absolutely, the human touch is so important. So I couldn't agree with you more. But actually, talking about the pandemic, this is one for you, Martin. What's the biggest shift, sort of change that you've seen in the way businesses operate as a result of this pandemic?
Certainly, speaking from my experience at Totaljobs and what we've been, the year that we've had, and we should set the scene first. before COVID struck, we had already decided that actually we didn't have representation from our staff. We didn't have employee resource groups. We had a new CEO who just arrived in the autumn prior. And so there was a new direction of travel from the organisation. And we're fortunate to have had that at the outset of last year. Because in starting to set up the ERGs, is there a better time with COVID hitting and uncertainty throughout an organisation, throughout the UK, throughout the world, to have further effort, further ways of communicating and focusing on matters that staff are concerned by. So these employee resource groups, volunteer groups, fundamentally shifted in my opinion, the culture within Total Jobs. And it's moved it on several notches, and there's a way to go yet, but actually everything, in a fortunate way, not by a planned way, everything was going in the right direction, travel direction-wise before COVID hit. And then we lent into, actually, ERGs are working, the new CEO's way of communicating from a distance is working. How do we do more of that? How do we continue the contact points, the touch points, the different ways of operating 5 days a week from distance? How do we support our staff? I think there is, finally on this, I think there is a popular phrase now that's occurring fairly regularly, I'm seeing, is put people first. And certainly, I don't think we struck on the material at that time when let's put people first, but our logic actually was embedded with that. So actually, if we think about the welfare and our staffing position and how people are feeling, and perhaps from Charlotte and Euan's perspective, it's also candidate feeling, if we put that first, then actually we'll do well out of this because we're human beings and we care. Yeah. We've certainly seen some trends on that increasingly over the last year.
Can I just add into that actually? Because I found myself like just piqued by like the putting people first. Something that we see often when we talk with organisations about culture as well as DE&I. And we have these sentiments and these mantras as businesses, don't we? Some values. The one thing I started to see this year actually was as there is obviously clearly a social movement that's changing the way that we view differences, and knowing that there needs to be a change over the last few years in our workplaces as well. I think there's still a gap between what we say and what our sentiment is. We put people first, and actually what employees, talent outside of our businesses, suppliers, clients see. And there's a bit of a reality gap often. You see it when we have posters which have our values on the wall, but actually, where are the behaviours that say we are people first? And you know, if we're putting people first, we're a people first business. If we still don't have people who have enough time to drop their day to day and attend training, or if we say that we're people first, but people are still doing 10-hour days and that's normal and acceptable, then we're not putting people first. And I think that's, I'm not picking on that one thing, but it's something I hear, that there's a gap. And if we're saying we are something, and our behaviours and our actions and the consequences that go with that don't deliver on that, or don't try to deliver on that, then we're not doing anything. It's just a lie. And I think the difference I've seen is that that's just not going to fly for very much longer. People will leave, people will have a view externally and internally, and then you get dissonance and lower employee engagement. And the social movement is carrying that, I think. And so I think organisations and leaders really need to understand that we can't overpromise. We have to be honest.
It's that thing about authenticity that we all talk about, but there is a disconnect between that, actually the reality of it.
Because we're thinking it's a comms issue, not a comms issue. It's, if we're talking about our people, let's be honest with our people, otherwise they're going to know. You can tell.
Just to follow on, sorry, Elaine. Just to follow on from your point, it's such a good point you make. And I read a study, and it was, to be honest, it was a couple of years ago now, but it was a study about, you know, how many people globally joined an organisation and actually felt that what they were told from attraction through to, you know, onboarding and then day one, did they actually feel that was true and authentic? And there's only 19% of people felt that the journey that they felt actually was reflected the organisation that they joined. So Tony, to your point, that authenticity, I've always had issue with the difference sometimes between, you know, kind of EVP or marketing, but do people actually feel that? And Elaine, your point is so valid now. it is now the need for authenticity and transparency now is more so than ever, and people will start to see through it more than ever, I think. So it's a great challenge, I guess, for us on the call, and Charlotte, the type of work that we do, that the power of I've always called it, quite sadly, I call it talent transparency, because your top talent and your talented people in your organisation are the best people to be the advocates for the organisation. All the fancy kind of branding and logo stuff, that's great, and that that's my job. That obviously plays a key part, but your people are your biggest advocates, and if you can unite them to take a message out, and if they genuinely feel part of something, especially in this whole remote workforce, they will be your biggest advocates, and they will be the biggest attraction tool that you can ever get your arms around. So Elaine, your point is so valid and so timely. So sorry for cutting over you. I just wanted to echo your sentiment.
Oh, please, yeah, absolutely.
I think I totally agree on that authenticity piece. I mean, we all know about the DE&I challenges and the DE&I targets that we're all set all the time. And there's so many companies that are like, yeah, we are a great place to work for women. And in reality, we know that women are more likely to be the caregivers. They're going to be more likely to be picking up kids from school, etc. And they're saying, yeah, it's really great. We have such an inclusive environment, and you'll be able to do all that here. And then you start, and it's like, no, you have to be in the office by 8:20, and you can't leave before 6. And what do you mean you've got to take an important phone call? And I think that one of the things that has changed is that companies have had to kind of put their money where their mouth is. So I know from some of the companies that I've been looking at, they're looking at actually having remote roles, roles that aren't necessarily based in that one location, which is something that I've talked to clients about for a really long time, but actually it has barely moved, barely shifted. But now, because actually it's been a whole year of us doing it, and no one's really suddenly all failed and not been able to do their job remotely. So actually, what is the need to have that? Now, I do think that there's absolutely a place for face-to-face interactions and conversations, but I don't think it needs to be there every single day. So I think it's a real shift that we've seen in the last year, and I hope that it's something that we can continue and go on with.
Yeah.
There was actually a report on Sky News recently that I'm kind of interested. Martin, I hope you're listening. But apparently that you can get a 3-month visa to Barbados and I think it's Antigua, so that you're able to work from there. Just hinting to HR directors, is that a possibility? Because hey, literally you can work from anywhere, surely.
I'm not going to confirm new policy on a Totaljobs webinar, Tony, but good effort.
Worth a try, Tony. Worth a try.
As much as we kind of joke about it, I think it just raises such an important question, though, because who would have thought, right? That's the thing. We never would have thought, no, you can't work flexibly from home because of X, Y, and Z. As a manager, I need to see all of these things. Funnily enough, we put all our effort into it. Yes, it did overturn everything, and there was there were other ripple effects that we had to manage. It's taken a lot, and it's taken its toll on us all. But it begs the question of what else are we saying that we can't do that actually we need to do, and particularly those things that are in line with what we're saying we're going to do as well. And I think that's where we learn from it, as to Euan's point. But I hope we learn from what's just happened over the last 12 months, that what else do we need to really challenge in a practical sense, having brainstorms about it, going out there, asking people what's needed, and then actually really thinking about what we need to invest in to future-proof our business, because we need to change.
Sorry for talking over there, Elaine. I guess just to your point, I think that's what I mean by people first, because people first, we didn't come up with the phrase. It's something that I've been reading articles on for some time now since. It was the principle, it's the logic of, okay, how do we look after our staff? Because we don't know how many weeks, and we were talking in weeks, how many weeks we're going to be working from home. If you take that principle into 2021 and then into the future, 2022 and beyond, you're kind of going, for me, authenticity is to say, an organization, I've never seen an organization that's in a perfectly fit 100% the perfect world organization, right? There's lots of brands out there, and they're great and they're glossy to Euan's perspective, but they're still not perfect behind the scenes. How do you take that organization and go from a people first perspective, to your point, Elaine, what else do we need to fix? let's look at it from that mentality. Let's look at driving change in an organization, not just because we're in COVID, but because then we're returning in a different way of working, because we sent Tony to Barbados. Actually, is that a gift? Is that an art to it? Okay, I'm still not answering your question though, Tony. But actually, is that something that as an organization we would want to move forward to? I think there are opportunities to go, it's this phrase, COVID keepers. What's actually stayed in the last year that we'd really want to hang on to and continue to have? What else actually have we been told, to Euan's point, is the art of the possible that we could go and do more on? And I think if we got that mentality, COVID has been negative in so many ways, but there are some positives coming out of it too.
I agree. I 100% agree. I suppose the thing that jumped to my mind is, and perhaps a step that we can take in that direction, is to understand how what we say is interpreted by those that work with us and for us. So, you know, we're sitting here, you know, this is a leadership panel, we're talking about in this leadership spiel almost. So yes, when we say people first, this is what we mean. But if I say people first, 1,000 organization, a 200-person organization, me personally, I'm going to think you care about me as an individual, and X, Y, that means X, Y, and Z. But companies are, you know, we're stuck in leadership mode sometimes, thinking about what we think people first means, not really thinking about what the other people think it is, knowing that everyone's going to think something different. So let's go out there and explain what we mean by people first or any other value. That's my frustration in there, but at the other side of who we're talking to here.
We say we are, but we're not really. Yeah, sorry.
Well, everybody's got an opinion on this. Charlotte, do you want to go first? I'll hang back.
I was just going to say, I think communication at every level, if you're talking to a candidate, if you're talking to someone that you already employ, and communication isn't just like putting out information to say, to Euan's point, you know, this is great, look at how great we are, but actually listening. And I think that it's so important that we take that time to listen to everybody. And even when you've got a candidate going through a process, ask them afterwards, like, how did it go? What did you like? What didn't you like? And actually take it on board. I think so often we put out these surveys and we get the information. Actually, do we do anything with that? And I think especially now, as we've gone through this difficult year with a massive change and virtual interviews and all the rest of it, actually, what can we listen to and what can we take away from that? Because as you said, Elaine, you know, we might just be at a leadership level saying this is what we think is the right thing to do. But for that entry-level person who's just started their first job, it could be a completely different perspective for them. And actually, we really need to take that on board.
Yeah, I totally agree. And following on from Elaine's point and Charlotte's point there, my heads went somewhere kind of different. And Martin, as an HRD, you might not like what I'm going to say, but there's never been a better time for me to be disruptive, right? So if we're talking about, you know, policies and procedures and benefits and things, why don't we just start asking our people? What do we want? You know, Elaine, your point, you know, we're sitting here as a leadership panel, and no doubt there's organisations around the globe sitting down and they're getting leaders together. What do our people want? What do our people need? Why don't we just ask them? What do you want? What do you need? What have we done well over the last year? What have we done not so well at? And actually, it's the not so well at part that I think leaders need to really embrace. Actually tell us what we're really poor at, and we'll really hold our hands up and say, yeah, we've not been great at that. But do you know what? We're driven over the next 12 months to fix it. And we need you as an employee base, and actually we need you as candidates to come and help us do that. So I think that, you know, if we wanted to be really disruptive, we could be. And I think there are some organisations out there they're doing that, but there's probably never been a more apt time to really just, to your point, Charlotte, let's ask candidates, how are we doing? Where have we fallen down? Let's fix it. Employees, how have you found the last few months? You know, has it had impact on mental health? Are we doing the right thing? How have we managed your performance while being remote? And just tell us, because I think, Elaine, your point as a group of leaders sitting down, again, as I say, it's happening businesses all around the world, but there's just that perspective blindness of we make assumptions that we know what our people might want. I think let's just strip it back and ask them, and then try and lead the business in the direction to give them what they want. And you know, not always be feasible, and let's tell them that. That's fine. But let's just ask.
So you and just to answer your question. Go on, Elaine. Go on.
You go, Martin.
I was going to say, Euan,
Wait, one at a time. One at a time.
Euan, for the record, as an HRD listening to you there, absolutely. Why wouldn't we do that? That isn't a reason. The role of HRD is not to say let's stop and not change. Actually,
of course.
I mentioned the employee resource groups earlier. We've actually encouraged them to come forward with new ideas, new policies, new changes and adoptions. Not as many as we possibly could, but actually we've had conversations and we've implemented change through our staff, through the resource groups and their suggestions. So look, if there's anything that's taught us in the last year is we're all humans and no one had the answer to COVID. So actually if someone's got a good idea, why aren't we getting hold of that and making use of it?
Yeah.
But to your point, we may not always be able to say yes, but let's hear the ideas, right?
And do you know what, Martin, obviously, Elaine, I know we'll come back to you. Do you know what, that's testament to your leadership style and to your organisation, though, because I guess a lot of organisations out there haven't operated in that way and probably won't. So it's absolute testament to your kind of mindset, and let's hear from our people and let's see what we can do. So
it's also part of learning going through COVID. If I'm brutally honest, it opens your eyes to how else do we need to operate in the future. Elaine.
Elaine's frozen.
Yeah,
I just wanted to add a little bit actually, because I think it is all about. Can you hear me? Am I here?
Yeah, try.
Oh. Hi, am I here?
Yeah.
Hello?
Go for it. Just go for it. Let's see.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. I think just it is about listening. Like, we're going to ask people, we need to listen. To Charlotte's point, that was the bit that stood out to me, that we need to listen. And the question about why are we not asking, bearing in mind we are all human, I think we need to be honest with ourselves, because what I see is that sometimes we don't ask. Organisations aren't asking their business, not genuinely with a view to listening, because they see it like a can of worms. I don't want to ask because then I'm going to put a lid on it, or then I'm going to have to deal with things. Because we're humans, all the way up to leadership, we're human, funnily enough, we're wrapped up in those, goes back to feelings again, we're wrapped up in feelings of shame or guilt or loss of power, fear, unknown. And so we just don't open them. Those are real barriers, in my opinion. So I think before we even get to the point of asking people and listening to them when they speak and managing their expectations, I think first of all, we really have to stop on the why have we not asked everything that we should ask? Because it's not operational, it's not logistical. The reason we haven't asked is because we don't really want to have to deal. And I'm being in the negative space. It's not to say that there's lots more positive around it, but I just think that point needs to be isolated a little bit sometimes.
Let me jump in there. I mean, Elaine, I think what you're saying is really good, but there is actually a continuum. So it's about asking, it's then about listening, and then most importantly, it's about adhering and executing on what you've listened to. Because if you can do that much, then hopefully you should be listening. You should be winning. Because people want to see change. They don't just be asked a question and then nothing happens, or you've listened but nothing happens. What we're trying to see, and that is positive change, and that's what we need to. But you know what? Let's move on this conversation towards community management. And I know that Charlotte is very, very keen on this. So what does workplace community management look like now?
Well, I think there's a couple of bits. So from my perspective, I'm a talent community manager. So I think I see from a bit of a different angle how important it is to build communities externally. But I think what we see with a lot of companies is that there's a focus on building a pipeline for roles externally and actually not mirroring that internally with their own colleagues. So I think that we need to build brand ambassadors with external candidates. We need to get people who are built in and brought in to the business. I think, and I don't know whether it's a generational thing, but if you look at COVID, a lot of people feel like a whole year has been taken off them, traveling, seeing family and friends, all that kind of stuff that they would have expected to do in 2020. And now I think people are starting to say, I'm spending so much time at work. I mean, what's the phrase? You've gone from working at work to working at home to living at work, because we just work in our spaces. And actually, I think there's more. It's not about just doing a job. There's actually so much more around the culture, around the benefits, around the networks. the opportunity that I think we really need to be open with our candidates about, and also mirror that internally. So I think it's just so important. And I also think actually, when we're looking at building communities, we also need to look to the future. We need to look at the skills of the future. We need to look at the mindset, and we need to be training people to be able to fill those roles of the future. So if we've got somebody in a role at the moment, they might be doing a great job, but actually what's the next step for them? What's the step for them in 5 years' time? And how can we support them to get there? And I think that by sharing all the great stuff that we're doing, and being authentic about it, I think authentic is probably the word of the webinar. You know, and to your point, Martin, yeah, no, we're not there yet. We've not got a 50-50 gender split, and we don't have a really clear progression plan for this role that doesn't exist yet. But actually join us and let's take it through together. Let's work and work out how we can get to kind of that next level as a collective. And I think it all just kind of ties in with what we've said, you know, listening, talking to the individuals, not just the internal ones, but also the external candidates as well.
Excellent. Anybody would like to add to that?
Yeah, I'll happily jump in. I can't disagree with anything that Charlotte has said, and I think when you look internally as well as externally, I think a lot of the time you can get feedback from internal candidates to say you're doing all this really exciting, very aggressive marketing externally, but what about me here and now? So I think you've started to see a lot of organisations do a lot more about the internal promotion of their roles, be it internal sort of career fairs or telling stories actually internally about the upcoming opportunities that we've got. Because I think one of the things that the pandemic has absolutely forced upon people is actually, am I in the right role? Am I in the right sector? Am I in the right organisation? So a lot of people are now starting, and again, I've read lots of reports on this, starting to think, actually, I'm not going to move job in the next 12, 24 months. I'm going to move sector entirely. So I think organisations have another challenge there of how do we really retain our talent, and how do we really ensure, to Charlotte's point, there's a story to say, do you know, Charlotte, we don't know what the next 24 months of your role looks like, but we want to really empower you. Go and tell us where you want to take that, and have those kind of adult, grown-up conversations. And I think a lot of people genuinely want to be a bit more empowered. They want to be heard more. To your point, Tony, they want to be heard, listened to, and they want to see action. So yeah, I agree with everything Charlotte says, and it's a great sort of conundrum, I guess, for organisations at the moment. Doing a lot to attract people, but then how do we retain as well? Because I think one of the things that we noticed, I guess, on Royal London, and I guess other organisations, Charlotte, you probably felt the same at Barclays, was huge influx of applications, but for the really niche roles where we would need to go and do, you know, that strategic headhunt piece, very hard to move talent. Lots of, you know, the rise of counter offers, people actually not willing to make a move because I'm in quite a good place. My organisation has looked after me really well during the pandemic, so why would I put my hat in the ring to move to another organisation? So it was such an interesting and continues to be such an interesting time, and that's I go back to the point of, I think organisations that made really good strategic decisions at the start and continue to really engage and manage their talent through this time, I think they will retain talent, and they'll actually just make it easier to attract as well, because that bleeds into the marketplace. You know, I've told many people how well AMS have, and Charlotte, you felt it as well. I think AMS have managed seismic change unbelievably well, as have Royal London. Royal London moved 98% of their workforce to work from home before lockdown was announced. That for me is just, that's exemplary. How do you manage a workforce? And then how do you keep engaged with them? So as I say, if you make those decisions, you need to stick by them and look after your people, be it internal, external. It's going to be a really interesting few years. I don't think this is going away anytime soon.
All right. Actually, you know, thanks for that. But you know, moving on from that sort of like attraction strategy, you know, let's look at this. And this is the topic of the moment. How should businesses be looking at their DE&I strategy today and in the months and years ahead? Because that's what we all really need to know, how to deal with this. Elaine, let's go with you first.
Yeah, I think the first one is, as I said earlier, which I think the group all agreed with, be honest. We have to be honest, not just in what we say, but in the awareness that we have or don't have. What do we not know? But having said that, I mean, for me, that's a fundamental, but it's something that for some reason we keep forgetting to do. The big one for me is to think about this as 2 lanes of work. So as we move forward and we want to progress with diversity, equity, inclusion, we should be having at least 2 lanes of work. What we saw as last year particularly, obviously, as the murder of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter 2020 started to have a ripple effect in corporate organizations and beyond. What we saw happen, like to an exponential rate, was a reaction to that, a positive reaction to that in most places of, we did not know this, we should have known it, but we did not know this, that's the truth, we're going to do something about it. And then we reacted, organizations reacted somewhat on the back foot. That's just human nature, that's what's going to happen. And the bigger the ship, the harder that is to deal with at the time, especially when there's a narrative of action. Where's the action? What we found happened is that the reactions and actions happened, but now with a bit more breathing space, even though things are still happening that we need to look at, we need to start to establish 2 lanes of work. One is, what can I do today that makes a difference? Transactional change, perhaps, process change. But long term, if this is a cultural thing, which I've never worked in an organization where it's not a cultural thing, what long term work do we need to do? What plan do we need to have that has proper investment, proper strategy, measurement, actions, investment, resource? So for me, it's, going back to the truth. We want to be an anti-racist organization, or we want to be an anti-sexist organization, or we want to welcome diversity or inclusion into our business. Where are the actions and behaviors long-term that deliver that? And if it's not going all the way up to C-suite, because they're the people who make stuff happen around here, then arguably I'd say it's not really going to happen long-term or in a sustainable fashion, i.e. what plan. So for me, 2 lanes of work. One, immediate action, we can do stuff today. Another, long-term, all with a view to knowing that there is no end. This is a process. I mean, there's loads more I could say. Give that.
Anybody else want to jump in on that?
It's just back to basics, isn't it? I think everyone's talking about it, and actually, a lot of the time it's like, let's just post on a job board, and we'll suddenly completely change our entire gender makeup of our organisation. And actually, it's more than that. And I think really engaging with people and being clear and open about what you do. I think virtual career fairs have been massive this year. And actually, it's been a chance to open to more people who might not have been able to attend a face-to-face event. And actually being there and being able to talk to different people within the organisation, I think really does demonstrate the real true kind of culture of what we're doing, rather than just posting the same token person that's in the organisation on a job board. I think there's a lot more about those conversations and actually kind of building up kind of what you're doing and what you're saying and who you are.
Yeah, I completely agree with both points, and Elaine's point there for me is that, that longer term strategy piece, there is that swim lane. What is going on? What is the internal proposition and culture? That's where, then Charlotte and I would maybe come in and maybe take that proposition out, but there needs to be that, that swim lane has to happen. The other part that Elaine rightly mentions is what can we do here and now? I think the here and now part is really interesting, because I think, Charlotte, the point you make as well, there's lots of organisations out there, and you can see it in the market that, 100, in fact, I saw a stat in July or August it was, that DE&I jobs in the UK increased by 106% in that 1 month. I think it was July. So Elaine, your point, everybody's reacting to it, and do you know what, quite rightly, that, as you say, it's human nature, we need to do something about it. I think the part that where I would quite like to see organisations go with this is the first part of Elaine's swim lane of the reaction part. What can we do here and now to make an impact? I would quite like step 1 to be, let's do that real audit of all the kind of data. Where are we just now? And just sit down and look at it and say, we're nowhere where we want to be, and be really authentic and transparent about that. Hold our hands up and say, we're not great at, the progression of women in this particular area, part of the business. We're going to actually really get into exit interview data and we're going to speak to our female. We want to understand why are they leaving, what's wrong with that culture, so that, you know, there is those swim lanes for that particular area. Longer term, what we're going to do to fix the culture, and what can we do immediately? What are the quicker wins? But I think a lot of the conversations that are happening in this space, how do we attract more people in from diverse backgrounds? What about retaining those people from diverse backgrounds? Those need to run in tandem for me.
Just to double down that point, I think it is about digging into it. I loved your point about this is about getting a picture of what's going on first. So many organisations don't do that, and it's really into it beyond numbers. So I think there's a stat of something like the US labour market is that 1.1 million people dropped out of the labour market in like October or September 2020. 1.1 million. The detail in that is really who and why, and it's something like 80% of those are women. So it's you don't just have to look at numbers, it's what is going on, to Euan's point, digging into the nuances.
You know, this is a fascinating discussion. I believe we could go on for the next hour or 2 hours just discussing it. And I'd ask all the attendees to look at things like the GEM report that tells you the problems with discrimination in the UK towards applicants. However, listen, we've breached our 5-minute warning. So unfortunately,
Tony, can I just drop in 20 seconds on that? And I think, first of all, Elaine through Project 23 has been supporting TJG for the last few months, and therefore I obviously completely buy into her point about two swim lanes. For me, though, I think there has been a reaction, but it should be about the long term. It should be, as long as we're making some small wins, quick wins, big wins, quick wins, as long as we've been doing that, it's about the long term emphasis. Don't let this die because last year made it a focal point, and then tick box, we've done it. This should be, to Elaine's analogy of the boat, right? If it's the tanker, if it's the oil tanker, it's taking time to turn. But let's continue to measure its turn and make sure that we know it's headed in the right direction. And sorry, back to your 5 minutes.
No, absolutely. I was just going to ask everybody we're all so used to takeaways in lockdown. Just give us your one quick takeaway that you could share today. So mine, if that was yours, if I take that as yours, let's go to somebody else.
I'll go. I think there's probably two things. One is more of a question, ask yourself, if you're really being honest about your statements of intent, whether they're your values or your position on diversity, equity, inclusion over the last 12 months, be honest and ask yourself, what are the behaviours and actions that go with that? Because that's going to lead you to solutions as well. That's what we're asking for. It's not about calling out or shaming. It's about really just checking in with ourselves. Otherwise, they're just kind of intent fumes. The other thing I would say is an out-and-out takeaway. I mean, there's so much, isn't there? But the one for me that stands out is, if ever there was a time for vulnerable leadership, saying I don't know or asking questions. I mean, the vulnerable leadership is a brilliant thing regardless, but this for me feels like the time to be able to say I don't know. I mean, how can we expect, I don't know, an average white cisgender female HR professional to understand what racism is and how to deal with it in an organisation, in an under-resourced department? It's just not possible. We have to be able to say I don't know and then act on that. So vulnerable leadership, I think, is another key takeaway for me.
Charlotte?
I think back to basics. I think that's a really important thing. Talking, listening, communicating. When you're talking about a job, when you're talking to your internal colleagues, just having that open conversation. I think for sources, and they're talking to external people who are looking to join the organisation, it's so important that we have that conversation rather than just rely on a video or the career site. Let's have a conversation about what it's actually like to work here. What's the culture really like? And obviously backing that up with the career site and content and all the other things that we utilise. But I think just really back to recruitment 101.
Absolutely. Euan?
It's a bit of a disadvantage going last because they're all such good points, and I sat here and everybody's taken the ones that I wanted. But I think takeaways for me, the one thing I would say is everybody on this call, be it everybody that you can see on video or everybody that's dialed in, everybody's resilience has been absolutely tested over the last year or so. I would do everything possible to ensure that your resilience is as high as it can be. Ask people how they're doing. look after one another. It's a very tough time out there. Put your arms around people. I think the mental health aspect has been incredibly challenging as well. So that element. The other part for me, I would just say and sign off with is, I think as a leadership discussion here and everybody on the call, if you take something away, the one thing I'm trying to take away out of this is to be positively disruptive. Let's do things slightly differently. Let's ask the question why. Let's do more with less, and be really authentic in doing so. So yeah, that would be mine.
Oh, thank you. So big thank you to all our panelists today for joining us, and to everyone who's tuned in. I think there's been plenty to take away, particularly around shifting gears, the way we attract and engage with candidates, and how DE&I should be at the center of everything we do as a business, both internally and externally. As a reminder, please keep an eye out for the follow-up email, as there'll be a recording of this webinar, and you can sign up for our next webinar, which is on the 28th of April, via the link in that email, or take a look at the chat box now. And that webinar will be the second look at the Global Talent Series, which is the landmark piece research split into 3 reports with over 209,000 responses from workers around the world. Kate Kavanagh, Managing Director of the network, will be joined by the MD and partner of Boston Consulting Group, Nick South, to discuss the findings from the reports 2 and 3. You can stay tuned and updated with all our research via our Totaljobs link on LinkedIn. And thanks again for joining us, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thanks
everyone.
Thank you.